Suddenly, this whole affair seemed more bearable. From a tranquil spire upon Selene, the Moonchild observed the Fangmoor. Her courtier had wandered away from Kobol's camp after the Great Rift closed, and she had returned to her throne. It now lay dormant just beyond the temple she had approached days ago. She swirled her glass, fine muscovite, polished until it shone like stars. The room was of equal luxury, as befitted her status. From here, it was hard to believe that she had once sought to make a throne of that pathetic little ruin. Yet it had defied her will, and such an insult could not stand. Originally, she had been assigned a single silo for the expedition. But with Selene present, she could unleash as many nuclear armaments as necessary. Even enough for a full tournament, should it become necessary. But for now, destroying that defiant little temple would suffice. She had ordered a new pair of legs manufactured and deployed for her courtier, something befitting its beastly nature. Selene's many silos had been unable to lock onto more distant parts of the forest, presumably as it was not truly a forest, but such things were irrelevant. She watched in vague disinterest as a scarlet light streaked towards the white structure and struck it. As the dust settled, she was somewhat satisfied to find the temple destroyed and the woods around it burning. She walked the galleries and halls of her palace for a while, savoring every moment. Selene's palace was unique, built with human proportions in mind instead of the varying proportions of a courtier. Thus, it was sinfully luxurious, constructed in innumerable architectural styles, and filled with art both ancient and contemporary. The servants were unseen unless called upon, and could predict the wishes of their charge before they wished them. All of it was perfect, but there was work to be done. Perhaps it would be appropriate to invite this Silex and his captors to the palace for a little chat. The sky had now fallen into darkness. The eternal sun of this forest blocked out by a moon which had been pulled out of a rift without warning. An imposing sight which would intimidate any who would look upon it. But if this was supposed to shatter their morale, it failed to do its job. For despite the new circumstances, the Karelians remained energetic in their step and eager to carry out their mission, especially with the recent arrival of cavalry reinforcements. The king in particular looked upon this moon with intrigue. So this was the Moonchild's home. An impressive sight to behold, and a reminder that it was fortunate they were allies. Especially as another salvo of those terrible weapons were launched to some far-off corner of the forest. His thoughts, however, were soon brought to a halt by an odd red dot on his right shoulder. Confused, he tried to brush it off, but to no avail. He turned southward and noticed in the distance a set of bushes were rustling despite a distinct lack of wind. His officers saw it as well and came to the same conclusion. One of the other parties was here and were watching their every move. This was something that did not sit well. And so they went to confront whoever these new contacts were, revealing themselves as humans clad in various designs of strange green armor appearing from the trees further back, while a final individual, who King Charles assumed was their leader, stood up from the initial bushes.
King Charles XII. Should I call you sire? I suppose not. I do not greet you with amity, but with a choice. We have been watching you. We know the size of your forces and their weaknesses. We have weapons inconceivable to you, able to incinerate your entire line formations in an instant, even through the cover of the trees and mist. They are pointed in your direction from the void of the heavens, unreachable to any of your arms. We move in shadows and fog, uncatchable and unseen by your kin until it is too late and your men bleed out on the forest floor. You can choose to fight us. You can choose to bleed. A sergeant grows miffed at this declaration. You would do well to treat his highness with more respect, you... The king silenced him with a raised hand before speaking, laughing at the woman's foolish proclamation. Unless the moon in the sky is in actuality yours, I see no reason to believe your claims, especially given your battered state. Regardless, initiating battle against you would be a waste of time and lives, for we have a grander task at hand. Which is why I am feeling generous and will extend my hand to provide you with another option. One without bloodshed, one without the stench of death. Gaze upon my blade, how it stands taller than a man. It belonged to a monstrous barbarian, skin red as embers, with glowing eyes and crimson tusks. Through his zeal and bloodlust, even he was wise enough to avoid battle with us. He gave me this sword as an offering of peace. Your own sword, no doubt a family heirloom, catches my eye. I want it. In turn, I will trouble you no further and be on my way. Tell me, wise king, what is more valuable to you? Your fellow countrymen or your gilded knife? Choose right now, with your servants watching and listening. Their lives are in your hands. A small part of the king was greatly offended at this brazen display of arrogance. However, a reminder that he was on a mission from God helped rein in his temper. After all, it was just a simple sword she was wanting. Regardless, he already missed the Moonchild's grace and refinement. Without a word, he removed the sword from his belt and handed it to her. But when she grabbed it, he did not let go, instead pulling her to him before speaking. Before I give you this sword, you will have to give something in return. Operation Nevergreen, Report 4. We engaged in hostage negotiations with a force who called themselves the Toyari Shogunate. I sincerely hope the High Dominus will understand the necessity of this action for the survival of his operatives. We traded Silex to them to establish a temporary truce. We were granted the sword of their leader as compensation. It will aid us to engage in a thick mist where our ranged weaponry doesn't function as intended. We will find Silex later. For now, survival and scientific advancement are our primary directives. To this end, we have made significant progress. Stargazer picked up 2 striking signals nearby. To our north, a militia of folkloric Santa's elves wielding overworld weaponry. Our current best hypothesis is that this dimension makes cultural ideas manifest physically. We have no intentions of engaging directly. The second signal showed us an army division of the historical King Charles XII of Sweden, led personally by that very regent. However, it was certainly not the same regent from our timeline, as evidenced by his hostility towards us and lack of knowledge of the Lunar Pact. Am I incorrect in stating that Charles XII was part of our very own Corps Evertian? I request confirmation from the Archivist of High Dominion Mist on this matter. We confronted this force directly and engaged in negotiations. We forced their hand and were able to gain possession of the King's sword, after which we broke contact and traveled westward. Perhaps we can study these blades from other realms and the effects of the Fangmoor dimension on their composition and function. In the meantime, they will serve us well in any upcoming hostile confrontations. We have discovered that the Fangmoor psychologically tethers its inhabitants in multiple ways, either to the forest or to the shadows. We seem to have been bound to the forest, despite our helmet spy protocols. The forest starts to appear more beautiful and serene. Adaptive measure programs have been implemented to isolate and suppress this influence without outright rejecting it. The forest bond makes us more aware of the forces and entities within the dimension, an advantage we wouldn't like to lose. Work continues on the development of countermeasures to the thick acidic fog. Signed, Captain Vega Iridian, the Cygnus.
The atmosphere as they walked through the forest was tense, to say the least. The memories of what happened at the shrine, their first proper contact with other forces, and the rapidly changing landscape had left the warriors on edge. A matter that was not helped by their newly acquired and somewhat vocal guest.
You know I can walk by myself, yes?
Said the figure, currently held under Jorichi's arm. Short of dragging them along with a length of rope, it was the only way for the figure to keep pace with the towering Ogroni.
Do you people understand me?
A grimace and a glance back from Norio was all they got as a response.
I'll take that as a yes. I don't suppose it'll be possible to stop for a bit, have something to eat, a drink at the very least.
Noriko opened his mouth to answer, but the growling of Jorichi's stomach answered for him. He was hesitant to stop, but the wary faces of his comrades convinced him otherwise. Setting up a number of basic barricades around themselves, and with some freshly caught fish on the fire, those present began to get comfortable, all except Silex, who squirmed from being tied to a tree.
So, may I ask where exactly we're going? He asked the gathered warriors.
Once we are rested, we march to the heart of this place, so that Matanushi may pass her judgment upon you.
Matanushi? Wait, you don't actually trust that tree, do you?
Silex said curtly.
Watch your tongue, small one. I will not idly sit and let someone insult the wild spirit as such,
replied Norio with a growl.
Oh, I'm sure this Matanushi is a saint, an honest deity. But tell me, oh great Hatamoto, are you certain that that tree you've sworn your life to is your god?
Look around you, at this place, this beauty. Do you say that this is not the work of the divine?
I'll concede it's pretty, but you misunderstand me. I am asking if you know if this is the creation of your god, and not something using its name and your devotion to its ends.
Silex said, garnering murmurs from the other Ogroni. Noriko shot a furious look back, staring them down, challenging them to defy the wild spirit. The tension built for a moment, before Naoki meekly spoke up.
The sun isn't moving in the sky. It hasn't for a while,
she began, growing more confident with every word.
And now it shares the sky with the moon. If they're here, who's fending off the evils?
Noriko pondered the question, unsure how to answer.
And what of the shrine we found?
asked Goruso.
What of it?
Noriko replied.
It was made of rocks. Cut rocks. Neatly piled. I've seen a shrine to Matanushi before. They only use wood and plants, leaves and such. Nothing as permanent as stone, he finished.
And what it did, joined Kaeda. Why would Matanushi allow such magics in her lands? Norio stood in stunned silence. He hadn't considered that, or the fact his fellows would doubt a goddess like that. Plus, what about those humans we met? The green ones, continued Kaeda. They were covered in armor and wielded such strange weapons. They said that they had used some tool on her. Shouldn't the spirit have done something to those who would bear such unnatural weapons against her?
Not to mention the others that were brought here,
mumbled Jorichi. Noriko mentally conceded that it was odd. A smile spread across Silex's face. Those green ones go by the name the Lunar Pact. They talked about the willow, remember? About how it mimics divinity, uses faith and devotion to get others to do its bidding? The others were nodding now, as a sense of dread seeped through Noriko. So, the sun is still as a corpse, a defiled moon beside it. Unknown people from unknown realms do unknown things in this holy forest, all in defiance of your gods. So tell me, do you truly think you are still serving this Matanushi? The question hung in the air, the others waiting with bated breath, their impatience showing on their faces as a million conflicting thoughts ran through his head. All the while, Silex simply stared him down. They were waiting for an answer, looking to know if their faith in their master was well placed. Well? Silex asked sternly. Noriko closed his eyes. He needed clarity, to focus. They were pushing for an answer now, anger seeping into their voices. That damn thing was corrupting them. It had to be for them to go against the wild spirit like this. But he couldn't bring himself to disagree. Some part of him wouldn't let himself do that. He had enough of the questions, the doubts, the impossible. He had had enough. No! He roared. The word felt bitter on his tongue, and hung in the air like a bad smell. He had been used. And worse still, he had dragged his fellows along with him into this delusion. No, he said meekly. An awkward silence hanging in the air. So, now what? Kaeda asked, matter-of-factly. We get answers, Norio said, filled with new determination. He had spent however long he'd been here living a lie. No more. He untied Silex. You know of this place, yes? A smile spread across Silex's face. Why, yes. And we have so much to discuss. Korbel pored over his desk, scribbling his schematics in a hand only half legible to any other than him. After the Moonchild's, moon had appeared in the sky, he had been getting increasingly anxious. With so much of his force dead, on first contact no less, Korbel was feeling the pressure to keep the rest of them alive heavily. Seraph was currently sitting in his bedding, evidently deep in thought. He'd been thinking a lot about that battle recently. Melkin was sitting next to him, as Melkin did, clearly at a loss on how to console his brother. Kobold knew he hated to see him in pain, but this was something none of them knew how to help with. It was no use. He couldn't think of how to help them, how to help any of them. They needed to recuperate, but they still managed to be on edge for the other forces who stalked this wood. Kobold was at a loss. He needed assistance. He glanced down at his display, 1327429. The Titanus standard form dimensional code for the Fangmoor. This would be instrumental. He looked back at his schematics, the ones he'd been frantically scaling down. That much energy couldn't be replicated with their current resources. But maybe a little less. Done. He had finished. The wreckage of the legs his forklifts had demolished had proved fine materials. He felt a twinge of pride at the havoc his engine had wreaked. But that was far outweighed by the tragedy they represented. Kobold hoped they would be free of their tragedy now. In the most legible handwriting he could muster, he took a spare scrap of paper and on one side wrote 1327429. And on the other wrote but one word. Then he looked at the little device on his desk and took out his knife. Under his breath, he muttered his mantra in his home tongue. Epotum, Tiakam, Iruka, Ventum, and sliced off his little finger. He immediately felt the pain. He had to bite a stick to keep the pain back. He picked up his finger and dropped it into the little rift creator he had made. A rift no larger than a fist opened up, and through it he shoved the scroll. With that, he collapsed. The blood loss and the brain work had taken its toll on him. Seraph, distraught, ran over to him, bandaging his bloody stump as he slipped into the sweet peace of sleep. He awoke with a start at a thumping sound coming from the camp. He sat bolt upright, looking frantically around. Was the Moonchild back? Was it another force? After a few seconds, his eyes locked on what was out of place. A woman standing up from the Fangmoor's dirt. Her garb looked familiar. She looked at him, her brown eyes glinting. With a smile, she spoke to him. She said the single word he had written on the back of that little piece of paper. Help. It had arrived. Otherworldly moonlight shone on the fen water, distorted by ripples as Gulta's knights waded through the strange night. Tangled reeds and mycelial tendrils swayed and parted to let the warriors of the Undermire through their domain. At the head of the party, the Rot Herald Morgan Bonesong led with his arms outstretched, feeling something the others could not. This power he called Oblivion. Gulta was behind him, and she was not impressed. We, as Knights of the Undermire, are enforcers of the natural order, he told her. Life and death, the cycle that breathes energy across the multiverse. To uphold this cycle is our sacred duty. And that's exactly what makes this forest an abomination.
Gulta's zeal spilled over.
This realm gorges itself on death. It parodies itself as it corrupts our senses. We all heard the Willows speak with the voice of the Undermire, but this place stands against everything we believe in. We've clearly been tricked, and it's our responsibility to destroy this place.
No! It was almost unheard of for the old knight to raise his voice like that, and the two walked in tense silence for a moment. Golta was fully aware that the entire band was now listening in to their conversation.
Lady Blackshell, you are right that this place rejects our traditional understanding of nature, but it offers us something new. I know you can feel it. The bonds that pull at us. A different cycle, as natural as life and death. But not in a way that we could understand at first. We do not experience death here. Instead, we are bound to shadow. And within that shadow, there is power. I ask you to trust me, Lady Blackshell. Golta, as your advisor and friend for so many years. The warband stopped. Before them was a silver bank of swirling fog. The same fog that had tried to devour them days before. That feeling of emptiness that had gnawed at them for days was almost overpowering now. Morgan stepped forward. The hungry fog reached for him. This is why the Undermires sent us here. To learn this new cycle. Shadow and forest. Oblivion and creation. A new purpose among the rifts. And he was devoured. Golta and her knights stood still. Water lapping around their knees. Paralyzed by the profound sense of oblivion that radiated from the fog. She was the first to come to her senses. Morgan! Morgan! What have you done? Then the fog parted. Two figures emerged, each with shadows oozing like blood in water from the gaps in their beetle plate. One was Morgan, the other was Harold Thornstrider, the Bloom Herald that had been killed during the first battle of the Fangmoor. See, Golta, this is the shadow between the rifts, so much more than death. This is oblivion. Morgan's words were met by the drawing of chitin swords. No, Morgan. This is blasphemy! Golta raised her staff. Her knights began to encircle the two specters. The cycle of oblivion and creation is calling, Golta. A purpose more grand than serving the Undermire. Morgan called as he stepped backwards into the fog. Harold followed beside him. The shadows must be fed, Golta. You'll hear the call eventually. Come find us when you do. The two Oblivion Heralds vanished, their bodies unraveling into darkness and dissipating through the fog. Golta sheathed her weapon. The betrayal hurt, but it brought clarity she hadn't felt since she arrived in the Fangmoor. She turned to address her knights, though they already knew what she was going to say. It's time to find Silex.